All right. Welcome to my talk at this event. And firstly, I have to really applaud the event for choosing this topic because focusing on the people part of growth is not something that's really spoken about or talked about a lot. It's very easy to talk about the process part and the metrics and analytics and tools and MarTech and all that fun stuff. This is a relatively new topic for a lot of people. So hopefully you'll get a lot out of this, just as I learned delving into it. And it's intentionally set as the provocative title that it is, which is that the growth lead is really the most critical variable for growth you're not optimizing for, because everybody else tends to focus on conversion rates and LTV and CAC and all those things, and all those things are important, but none of that happens without the right person, leading growth at your company. And so, if this isn't right, everything else falls apart. And the very reason I even decided to delve into this topic was when I was writing the Growth Hacking for Dummies book in 2019. And as I was going through what topics I wanted to cover, and I hit the people part, it struck me that for a field that's so obsessed with numbers and metrics and data, there was no people data, which was really shocking to me, because everything that I read that had to do with what makes for a great growth person, it was this anecdotal stuff about, oh, they're this amazing combination of left brained and right brained, and they're so creative and they're so analytical. And I'm like, that doesn't really help me. Like, how do I really identify one? How do I know what to look for beyond any of that? And so that's what started my journey down trying to identify, like, can we, just as we do with our business metrics and our marketing metrics and our sales metrics, can we also quantify our people metrics as well for growth? And it was very fortuitous at the time that I happened to be working at a company called the Predictive Index, which 60-year-old company, most people have never heard of it, but they have an assessment that quantifies work style behaviors. And just as you would measure marketing in terms of conversion rates, or sales in terms of your one deals or things like that, this is a help you then quantify work style behaviors. And this is different from personality tests you might be familiar with, like Myers-Briggs tests, for example, because personality is different than how you behave at work. And how we behave at work is, at the end of the day, tied to something we are hardwired to. We have these inherent drives we are born with, which express themselves as our needs, which show other people and ourselves what these are in terms of the way we behave. And so, just as you have ways of quantifying business metrics, they had a way of quantifying work style behaviors, which they expressed in what they called factors, which they summarized as A, B, C, D, as you see on the screen. A standing for dominance, B extroversion, C patience, D formality, and you can read the descriptions on the screen. Uh, but all this gave you then was a very quantitative way of understanding how is somebody hardwired to behave in a work context. And I don't want this to become a talk about the predictive index, because that's its own long talk. But when you do this assessment, it can spit out one of 17 different patterns for the way you might behave. And this is just an example of what a pattern may look like. And depending on how you're hardwired, your A, B, C, and D positions will change. And so, again, this gives you a very specific quantitative way of looking at work style behaviors. And so, what I did was I went and surveyed over 30 great growth leads from around the world. And these are from companies you haven't heard of, to companies you may have heard of, like MailChimp or Drift, to companies you may not even expect have growth teams like IBM. And I looked at all of their patterns. And even before I did that survey, My ingoing hypothesis was that growth leads will have a very specific work style pattern. And that hypothesis was based on just anecdotally what I had seen. I was lucky enough to begin my growth career with Sean Ellis, who has a very specific way of working. And I'd observed other people as well who behave very similarly. So, like, okay, I think if I was to give them all this survey, I would see one dominant pattern emerge. And to my surprise, there wasn't one, but there were three. And again, just to go back to what the predictive index does, it spits out one of 17 different patterns, and these are just three of the 17, and they all have these nice names associated with them. And my initial hypothesis was that they'd all be this maverick style pattern, which, if you're as old as me, and you're familiar with Top Gun, then you know what that character behaves like, right? Very innovative, very outside the box thinking. Failure means nothing. Just literally come up with solutions nobody's ever thought of. But as I looked through these profiles, and I found these other two, and you know, at first I was quite surprised, but when I dug deeper into them, they started to make a lot more sense. And the second pattern, which is called the individualist, which is characterized by very independent behavior, very persistent behavior, while still remaining results oriented. And this makes sense because if you've spent any time in growth, there's a lot of testing and experimentation, and believe me, most of them fail. And that can be very demoralizing, for a lot of the time. And so you need somebody who's going to be like a bulldog and just keep at it no matter what. Right. So this work style pattern makes a lot of sense too. And the third one, which is called the persuader, which, as the name suggests, is really all about influencing. And this makes a lot of sense as well, because growth, is not about this magical growth hacker sitting in a corner and doing whatever the hell they want to do. It's about a team sport. In fact, this is the cliche that growth is a team sport, and it's about convincing everybody of here's the way we might want to operate and here's where our biggest opportunities may lie, and getting the entire team and organization rallied behind you to start rowing in the same direction. And so, when I stepped back and looked at this, I'm like, this makes a lot of sense that you could have any one of these patterns, as a dominant work style for a great growth lead. And when you start to look at the characteristics in a little bit more detail for each of these three, you start to see that they're all non-conforming work styles. They're all about being very results oriented, but they're all about challenging the status quo, right? And they're all about solving problems and getting everybody converted over to their point of view, right? And this has a knock-on impact, as we're going to see moving forward. Uh, and so, my second hypothesis was that because of these specific work styles, their work styles were focused specifically on innovation and agility. And I had this hypothesis even before looking at these results. And for this to make sense, and I'm going to have to take a step back into another 60-year-old sort of framework called the competing values framework. Now, this is something that's been around for a really long, long time. You can Google this. But the basic premise of this framework is that teams are focused primarily on operating in a certain way. And when they choose very intentionally to operate in a certain way, the opposing way of working, is in constant tension with that way of working, which is why it's a competing value. And as you can see in this sort of quadrant-shaped diagram on the screen, the way the competing values works is that the competing value is the one that's diagonally opposite. And so, for example, the create and the control values are in direct conflict with each other, because the create uh, sort of value is all about flexibility. It's about doing new things. It's about change. Whereas the control value is all about stability, and it's about order and precision. Right? And it's the same thing with the other two diagonally opposing quadrants, because one has to do with focusing internally on the team and the needs of the team and the processes of the team and the company, versus one being more focused on the needs of something external like customers and the competition. And depending on where the team believes its primary focus and way of working is, will then determine what else is in tension with it. And these values then express as team cultures, right? And uh, those cultures, again, all have very specific sort of characteristics. And so if we express them in this way, uh, you have what's called a cultivating culture, which is, again, all about cooperation, collaboration, patience, teamwork, group success, the community within the team. That's what's most important. Again, not to say that other things are not important or they can't do other things. It's just that this is what the primary focus of that group is. And then you have exploring cultures, which are all about flexibility, right? Adapting to new challenges, pushing forward. There's a lot of uncertainty here, but that's what they've chosen to operate as, and that's what drives them. Then you have producing cultures, which are all about drive and assertiveness and independence. And it's all about action, 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 and results. Like that is what matters more than anything else. Right? Again, other things may matter, but this is the primary motivation for this sort of a culture within any team. And the last one is called the stabilizing culture, which is, again, it's very conservative, but it's all about being very reliable, very steady behaviors. Process, procedure mean a lot to these sorts of cultures. And you can even look at this and think back as to, so what is my team like, or what is my organization like? And you'll find that they primarily fall into one of these sort of quadrants. And again, these quadrants may be very different based on even individual teams within a larger organization, because what they need to focus on as a specific team culture or organization within a larger organization may be completely different. Uh, and so when we talk about growth teams, their cultures are primarily focused on being exploring type cultures. And again, I'm going to keep re-emphasizing this, that just because they focus primarily on this doesn't mean they don't also value any of the other ways of operating. And you'll see this uh, towards the end of this talk as well. And if we were to sort of start to quantify these behaviors of these sorts of teams, what we'd find is that, again, they're very nimble, very flexible, very creative. They prioritize speed over completeness, right? You hear the cliche of, done is better than perfect. That is a growth team, and that's an exploring culture. So again, not about perfection at all. Let's just get it done, but let's spend time, inventing and iterating, because again, a lot of experimentation in these sorts of teams, right? So it's all about trying new things that have never been tried before. Take that big risk, make the mistake, because again, mistakes are not mistakes in these groups. They're all about learning and finding out what to do as much as what not to do. And again, it's about, can we find a new and better way of doing things, because it's the status quo is never good enough for these sorts of teams. And so this is how we can summarize these the culture of an exploring type team. That then translates to, what does this team value, right? And we talk about values more from organizational perspectives, but we can bring that down even to the perspective of a growth team. And so when we look at what teams this value, like they value, again, it's about finding new things, right? So it's novelty is a big thing for groups like this, right? Because they're always on the hunt for people and culture wise, right? It's all about new ideas, products, ways of working. So it's not just focused on A/B testing or new marketing channels. It's even the way we work as a team. That may not be the optimal way, and as the team grows, hey, we need to find better ways of working as well, right? So that's a core value for a team like this. And again, not about status quo, right? So they thrive on originality. Latest and greatest is what drives, and what this team values the most. Old, like yesterday, is it's not even yesterday's news. It's too old. Like, what's new today? What's new going to be new tomorrow, day after tomorrow? That's what this team values, right? And again, as the name suggests, exploration. Right. So this team is all, will feel like it's already behind if it's not up to date on what's happening, not only within the company, because that informs a lot of ideas for what they can do, but also what's happening outside their fields. Right? Because, if growth is anything, it's about getting inspired to test new things. And it's not just, hey, what's my immediate competitor doing? It's what are people in fields completely unrelated to me doing? How are they capturing people's attention, or how are they holding on to customers? And what can we learn from places like that? That's about looking in unexpected places, to find that competitive edge. And if you're going to do that, then by definition, right, this team values keeping an open mind, because again, it's not about my opinion or your opinion or the highest paid person's opinion. It's, let's experiment and see if an idea has potential. Let's double down on it. And finally, this team values flexibility. I mean, again, think about what happened over the last year. Right? COVID hit, all the rules out the door, right? And so being able to adapt to, something that's changing really fast, rapidly. Some people thrive in that sort of an environment, and some people don't, right? And so, but for this kind of team, that is almost the norm, because there are always going to be opportunities, some very time sensitive and some very unexpected, that are going to constantly be hitting you. And if that's the kind of atmosphere that drives you, then the growth team is something that values that sort of behavior and work style, right? And so as we talk about behaviors, so if those are what growth teams value, right, you can again expect they completely look for people in the entire team that express these non-conforming behaviors. We're always emphasizing on doing things differently. Being unique is a very explicit characteristic. It's not about sameness. It's not about, here's the way we always done things, so we'll continue to do things. Or, hey, we had a big win 1 year ago, and we're going to sit on our laurels and enjoy that big win. Because again, if you've been in growth, big wins never last. This one tends to throw people off, like, because when you say you need enthusiastic behaviors, everybody says, hey, I'm enthusiastic too, right? I'm not this sort of cynical person showing up at work every day. But again, the kind of behavior we're talking about when we say enthusiasm is people constantly on the search for new inspiration and new ideas, right? And without a team that is passionate about behaving that way, right, you're never going to have a growth team that's going to be able to lean into this exploring mindset that is necessary for this team to operate, right? And uh, by definition, what that rolls into is a very restless behavior. And some people are very happy doing what they do or doing the same thing every day, and that's not a ding on them. If that's the kind of behavior your job needs, like let's say maybe you're an accountant or something, then great. That's probably better suited than somebody who's constantly looking for new ways of doing things and disrupting the status quo, right? And so by definition, this is a very fast-paced sort of group, because your advantage is in finding something before your competition does. And again, not a surprise, right? The behavior, everybody's expected to be thinking big. It's like being like Neo in the Matrix, right? It's where Morpheus tells Neo, free your mind. This is literally the group that encourages freeing your mind, because it's without that big idea, or and trying to figure out whether it works, you're always going to be trying to find growth in the margins, right? And that's not what this group is about. And so if we look at this in total, right, that a team culture ultimately then expresses as a team work style, right? Because that's what happens day to day. And ultimately you can express those teamwork styles in slightly different ways as well. And this brings me back to my original hypothesis of that growth leads would be focused more on innovation and agility, right? And the growth lead is so important because the growth lead will drive the culture of that team. And so when I took all of these people that I'd surveyed and I plotted them on this sort of a quadrant, what I got was something like this, right? And this sort of proved out my hypothesis that most of their behaviors are hardwired for innovation and agility. Now, that is not to say that all the people who fall outside of this agility quadrant can't express that sort of a behavior, right? All this means, again, is that for the people that naturally fall into this quadrant based on their work style pattern, what that means is that it's easier for them to lean into this behavior. That's what they're hardwired for. For the people who fall outside these quadrants, All that means is that through some combination of self-awareness or training, they figured out, what the gap was between the behavior they are hardwired for versus the behavior that's needed for their team to succeed, and have closed that gap. And none of these people that are were surveyed are shitty growth leads in any way. These are all people working on really, really big things and important things, right? And so they've all figured out how to express this behavior to be really ready to risk everything, to be very entrepreneurial, be very creative and problem solving, even if that's not how they may be inherently hardwired for. But we can take this a step further, because as I said just a few minutes back, that the growth lead basically drives the culture of the team as well, right? So this is the kind of behavior that most of them are hardwired for, that has a natural knock-on impact as to how the team operates. And the way the team operates comes down to like three dimensions. It's like the way the team communicates, the way the team makes decisions, and the way the team takes action. And we can actually plot those behaviors as well. And so when we relook at how a growth lead impacts team communication, right? I was actually surprised to see that that there wasn't one clear cut quadrant that I could place people into, and there was almost this uh, 50-50 split between what's called a persuading style and a telling style. And all of this makes a lot of sense, because again, the telling style, just given what a growth team is supposed to be, right? It's all about, I have opinions, and it's not because I'm the growth leader or I'm the highest paid person on the team. It's because I have data to support what I'm saying, and that's why I have a pretty firm opinion on what I'm saying. And because of how fast the growth team moves, again, it's all about assertiveness. It's about, hey, we're doing this, we're not going to spend time in committee, here's what we're deciding to do as a team, you know and let's get that discussion out of the way as quickly as possible, because we need to keep moving, right? And the split with the persuading style also is key, because like I said earlier, it's not about a single opinion and saying we're going to do it because I'm doing it. Growth is a team sport, and everybody has to come along, and everybody has to be convinced and be bought in. Otherwise it's just not going to work, because people are going to slack off, or they're like, oh, I don't really believe in it, and that's why I didn't do my experiment properly, right? Or I don't think that what we're focusing on is correct, and so I didn't do it no matter what, right? So this fine balance between you will come prepared, you will have opinions, you will be ready to make your case, right? But at the same time, in doing it that way, you will then be able to convince the rest of your team that A is the best way forward, or B is the best way forward. The next impact this has on the team as well, is how the team takes action. And you can plot this in a few different ways as well, but unsurprisingly, right, the way the team takes action is very closely related to the culture of the team as well, right? So the team is all about moving fast, challenging the status quo, right? It's try new things all the time and in very, very unique ways, right? And where earlier we were talking about general characteristics of cultures and teams, now the data starts to support that. If this is the kind of sort of culture in has, now we can be assured, we have more data to tell us for the first time that because a growth lead is hardwired to behave a certain way, this is the kind of behavior that they will try to get the entire team to start to express. And then the last sort of impact on a team is how the team makes decisions, and this is really, really important, right? Because as we were talking about earlier, is everybody should have opinions, and because this is about finding the best way forward, right? Everybody should be coming prepared to share it, right? And which means that this is not a passive team to be on. This is going to be a very actively engaged team, right? Where everybody will have an opinion, everybody will have to come and share it, right? And it doesn't matter. And I experienced this firsthand, because I was on a team with Sean Ellis, right, godfather of growth hacking, and he would come with opinions all the time. And there was nobody on the team scared about telling him, yeah, but I think we should test that. That's a good idea, right? Not because you're Mr. Growth Hacking, and you may have a lot of experience, but we just don't know. And that was just fine. And it takes a certain kind of growth leader to encourage that sort of behavior within the team, because without that, the best ideas that could be tested will never surface, and you'll always have what's called the hippo, if you're familiar with that phrase, which is an acronym for the highest paid person's opinion, which will always take center stage no matter what, right? And so, you know again, this is probably the first time that there is some data supporting growth leads and work style behaviors of not only them but their impact on the team. And I'm hope this starts to give you a sense of how important it is to find the right kind of person to lead the team. And I'm sure some of you may even be thinking that, hey, okay, I buy all of this, but I maybe don't have the budget, or I don't want to invest in a tool like this to help me figure out whether the person may or may not be the right growth lead. And so, if we were to boil everything down, there's a way to sort of hack your way into finding out if somebody is has the potential to be a great growth lead. And so, I can share four questions with you that will give you a much better sense of if you're looking for either people to lead your growth team, or maybe even you want to become somebody who leads a growth team, as to what kinds of questions might give you insight into how well prepared somebody might be for such a role. So the first question is, how do you balance the need to get things done versus finding better ways to do them, right? Because again, think back to what you've just seen. uh, this is a team that's all about finding new ways of doing things, right? And if you're somebody who's like super into process, super into this is the way things are done, that's probably right. But it's also true that for teams like this, you have to get shit done no matter what, right? But at the same time, you're also finding new ways to do them, right? And that is a constant balance. And many of us are hardwired one way or the other, right? And so I think the answer to this question will give you a lot of clarity as to how somebody might behave one way. The second question is sort of, how do you handle a situation where you need to deliver something with very few guidelines? And because again, if you've been in growth and it's all about finding new things, there is no rule book, there is no playbook. You are making up the playbook as you go along, right? And again, for certain kinds of people, they need a lot of instructions, they need a lot of detail to do their job, and a lot of guidance, right? Which again, for certain roles, that may be perfect, right? But for this kind of a role, you're literally making things up as you go along. It's the cliche of building the airplane while you're flying it, right? So how does somebody handle that sort of a situation? The third question is about, tell me about a time where you had to change directions quickly, right? How did you respond, and what was the outcome? Go back to the example I just mentioned a short while back, right? I mean, think about what happened during COVID, and how everything anybody knew about what buying behaviors of people were, or what they thought were priorities, all gone, like literally on a dime. The most important thing in people's lives was toilet paper. It's like nobody's interested in B2B SaaS at that point, right? So how do you deal with a situation like this where everything has changed, right? And some people would very justifiably freak out in a situation like that, and a lot of people did. But there are many cases where people look at that as a challenge and say, okay, whatever we knew out the door, fine, we'll figure it out. And that can do figure it out attitude is really, really important for a role like this. And the last question you can lean on to is, tell me about a time that your solution to a problem may have been really different than what's been done before. Because this is it's a problem in a lot of companies, right? It's this is the way we've always done things attitude, right? And it's hard to challenge the way things have already been done. And uh, however difficult that may have been, like if you're going to lead growth, status quo does not matter, right? And so if somebody has never challenged the status quo in any way, how can you tell that they'll be able to do it when, you know, growth, which is arguably a very, very stressful job that requires you to break rules all the time, they'll be able to handle that job correctly, right? And so, again, irrespective of whether you choose to go down a more formal path of using a tool, or whether you choose to, use questions like these to give you a sense of, can this person express the right kind of behaviors, right? This will, make you much more prepared to have the right person in place, than going on, somebody's reputation or somebody's recommendation, right? Or even what they may say during an interview, uh, right? And so these are clearly great interview questions that you can add to your toolkit for this very specific role. So the last thing I want to leave you with was my third hypothesis, and that is, while all these work styles are great for these sorts of growth people, they are not enough to execute on the strategic priorities of growth teams. Because remember what I said when I first talked about the competing values framework. Those quadrants may be the primary focus, which is not to say that other quadrants may not also have some level of focus, right? And so when I surveyed all of these growth leads, what I also asked them about was, okay, tell me not only about, you know, just, filling out the survey and, give me your work style, but as a growth leader, what where do your priorities lie within the team, and what are all the things you need to get done? And what you see again on the left side, and just as a reminder, is what the distribution of all the growth leads were and what quadrant they fell into. But on the right hand side, what you see are basically a listing of 20 strategic priorities classified by quadrant that they fall into. And I asked them to anywhere from 6 to 8 of the things that they would focus on most in a growth team. And unsurprisingly, they picked things that belonged in all quadrants, and it was almost an equal distribution of things that fell into all quadrants. Now, this doesn't tell you about which one they focus on most, but what it tells you is that no matter what, a growth team has to focus on multiple things at the same time and multiple ways of working at the same time. Because just being all about innovation and agility is not enough. At the end of the day, all of those tests that you do, they have to produce results, because guess what, you're the head of growth, and without results there is no growth. So there has to be some level of focus, even within the results and discipline quadrant. Also unsurprising that the process and precision quadrant would have some level of focus, because at the end of the day, growth is a process. It's not about these tactics that you see in all these articles. Here are the 5 greatest headlines to try, and these are the 5 kinds of Facebook ads you need to run, right? This is very specifically about, is there a repeatable process of testing and learning that we can execute on day after day that can then give us the learnings and the results that we're looking for? And again, also not would be some level of focus in the teamwork and employee experience quadrant, because I'll bring back the cliche again, growth is a team sport, right? There's no one magical growth hacker sitting in a corner that's going to do anything for you. The team isn't along for the ride, because it's simple math, right? One person is less than many people, right? So if many people you know are competing, it's very hard to beat such a team like that. Means is that this has a knock-on effect on who else should be part of the growth team. Right? Because a common mistake that people make is that, oh, I'm just going to hire more people like me, and that may be the absolute wrong thing to do. And especially when you look at through the lens of work styles, what you want to make sure is, for a team like this, is you want really complementary work styles. So as an example, if you have a growth lead and maybe even, let's say, a growth engineer focused on innovation and agility, because you might want an engineer who's different from the regular engineer, that's going to take a little bit more time to get things right, versus an engineer who's really fine about, I'm going to build out snippets of code, I'm going to hack something together, and if something doesn't work, fine, I'm going to throw that piece of code away. That's fine, right? That may be the kind of engineer you need in this sort of a team. Versus if you have like a data scientist that you might want on this team, uh, clearly you don't want somebody who's going to be willy-nilly and not detail oriented about their analysis and their results, right? So maybe you do want somebody who's very different from the growth lead and is somebody who's falls more within the result based on their work style, right? And as you make more and more decisions about who is going to land up on the growth team, I think uh, understanding where the priorities of the team lie, where people's specific work styles may fall, that gives you more information on where gaps on your team may be, and that helps you cover for those gaps and optimize for those gaps, and that's how you build out a well-rounded growth team, keeping in mind that no matter what, as you fill out these gaps, the primary focus of the team will still be on innovation and agility and exploring, right? And so that's all I had, and I hope this was enlightening for you as you stayed on for this, to give you a little bit more clarity as to the importance of who you bring on to lead your growth team, because everything falls apart if you don't have the right person in the right seat to execute on the kinds of strategies that growth teams need, right? And so if any of this was exciting or enlightening for you, and you're curious to learn more, you can, if you have the LinkedIn app, just scan that, it'll connect us, or take a screenshot, it'll remind you to connect with me. I'm more than happy to nerd out about this topic, because I've gained more and more appreciation for the people side of growth, you know believing it to be as if not more important than the process side of growth, and this is where my sort of current interests lie. So I'll stop there, and I'll take any questions if there are any. And I also fully realize that a lot of the questions you may have may not be simple questions and may need an extended discussion, which is again all the more happy to have those sorts of discussions offline and after the event as well. So right, so I'm going to hang out for maybe a couple minutes more, and if I'll be here till the end of the session. And if there aren't any, that's fine. I'm more than happy to give you, 5 6 minutes of your time back for you to take a break and go to your other talks as well. But I had a great time presenting here, and thank you for staying as long as you did. I appreciate your time and your attention.